Kitco Mining's special coverage of the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference is brought to you by Snowline Gold.
Will 2024 be Silver's year? This is Paul Harris for Kitco Mining at the Vancouver Resource Investor Conference. And joining me today to answer the question is Peter Krauth, author of The Great Silver Bull and editor of Silver Stock Investor. Peter, welcome back to Kitco.
Thank you so much, Paul. Always a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we start talking about 2024, the year that's just begun, let's go back to 2023. What was 2023 like from your point of view for the silver market?
So it was challenging, there's no question about that. In fact, global demand actually came off a little bit. And if you dig a little bit deeper and you drill down, you look at the subsectors that suffered a little bit in terms of demand. You had silverware, jewelry, and net physical investment. And if you look a little bit farther back, so 2022, each and every one of those three categories were at all-time high records. So to see them come back a little bit in 2023 is not a complete surprise. It's a bit of a reversion to the mean, and it's still at above the prior 10 years sort of average. So we're still into sort of a new, phase of higher demand for silver.
Okay, now at the moment, silver's finding it hard to break out from the $23 per ounce price point. Silver seems to be moving very different to gold. Gold has recently hit its all-time high in US dollar terms of more than $2,000 per ounce. What is holding the silver price back?
I don't know. I wish I did. But I think that silver has started to act more like an industrial metal. And if you even look just back at 2023 numbers, we're at over 60% now of silver is actually going to industry. And a few years prior, it was only about 50%. So it's becoming gradually more of an industrial metal. The demand from industry is more predictable, and it's just been sort of a steady rise. I like to say that the price of silver is supported by the industrial demand, and it provides sort of a rising floor under the silver price, and that it's actually when investment demand comes back in a big way, kicks in, and that's when that's the wild card that starts to really push silver prices higher.
It does seem that silver's, let's say, forgotten it's a monetary metal.
That's right.
In the near term.
That's right.
Okay, now we talked about, you mentioned that demand for silver from industrial users, a key one of those is growing, and a key one of those obviously is energy transition things.
Absolutely.
Such as solar panels. Now in terms of the silverware aspects, with silverware we're obviously talking about knives and forks, that kind of thing. Exactly,
more decorative type.
Is there a generational factor at play there? You know, millennials and Generation Z, is that something antiquated? That's parents' generation, grandparents' generation, we're not interested in that. Is there an area there where silver's losing tread?
Yes, I think so. But to be fair, it's not all that significant to the overall demand for silver, but yes, you're right. Where we do see a lot of demand, even for silverware, tends to be in India, which is also a big demand market for physical silver as well as silver jewelry. So it hasn't been a huge factor, silverware, in terms of the sort of lackluster or falling demand for it. It's still there, but it's something I believe that we're going to see more and more of, that's going to slowly kind of go away.
Do you think that will track into silver investment? Because if the younger generation of people don't see the value in silver or the appeal of silver, will that translate into their rejection of that as an investment opportunity?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that when silver starts to move, odds are it'll start to move in an environment where very little else is moving. So maybe with precious metals, maybe with Bitcoin to some extent, but all three of them, being viewed as safe havens. So I think that the investment demand will by far sort of outpace any kind of drop in silverware, for example. And I think even younger generations will start to pay attention. They'll look for the assets that are moving, and it will be among those being a safe haven.
With the people I've interviewed about gold at the event, they're looking ahead to the US Federal Reserve, and when it does make the pivot to start cutting interest rates. Will that also be a pivotal moment in the silver space?
I think so. A bit of sort of mixed feelings, or a couple of points. I'm on the fence a little bit about that, because silver being so much of an industrial metal, at the point at which the Fed starts cutting rates is because they're needing to stimulate, because we're either in or at the start of a recession, and so you would expect that will provide a diminished favorable outlook for silver, because the economy will be slowing down, and again, silver being so much of an industrial metal. The other side of that is, as you mentioned, silver being a monetary metal, and so if gold has really started to, or when gold will start to kick off in that kind of environment, I do think that perhaps not immediately to the same extent, silver will react as well, and it usually does with a lag. It has this industrial side as a bit of an overhang, but it will catch up to gold, and then it will absolutely outpace gold. It has done that multiple times historically. I expect that will happen again this time around.
Silver has a higher beta, so when it runs, it really runs.
It sure does.
And that translates into, let's translate that into the resource stocks. There's still companies that, really still want to have silver in their name, because they get that exposure, they get that kick when the silver price moves, and they don't want to give that up, even though the amount for the producers, gold is increasingly higher percentage of their income. Right. So there's few primary silver deposits out there that have an incredible value because of that beta potential. What's the outlook for M&A in the silver space, do you think?
So I've been expecting it for a while. I do think that we're going to start to see that. There was an interesting chart I saw from Crescat going back a year or two, where they looked at the prior bull market. And when gold really took off in sort of the late last decade, 2009, 2010, 2011, you had a bit of a lag, and then M&A absolutely exploded and really caught up. And unfortunately, a lot of bad deals were done, but this was being done with much higher share prices. So they used their currency, their share prices as a currency to go out and buy all sorts of things. There's a big gap now. That's very much true. I think that it's going to catch up, and I think that actually presents an opportunity. So, we're not quite at it's hard to know. You will only know if we know looking back. Have we seen a bottom yet? It's possible. I think there's a little bit of perhaps downside both in gold and silver. I don't think those bottoms are very far below where we are now, but the upside is tremendous. And I think there'll be a bit of a lag. The M&A will certainly come and catch up in a big way, and probably some bad deals will get done again.
When you look back in the silver equities, a couple of years ago, companies were able to raise a lot of money, and they put that to work. The last couple of years, we've seen a lot of drilling, projects advancing, economic studies, resource updates, and the like. The financing window at the moment is firmly closed. Gold going above $2,000 per ounce has not opened the financing window. So imagine a lot of the juniors are, relatively speaking, starving.
Right.
How do you think that's going to play out this year for them?
It's probably going to continue like that for a little while. There was a pretty good deal that BlackRock did. They raised $5 billion, first bought deal in the silver space in something like July. It was at a considerably lower price. So that, is dilutive, obviously, but it's perhaps a good early sign in terms of what will come. And depending on quality of project and so on, some are going to struggle and some will have an easier time raising funds. I think that the better quality ones will always have that ability. And, there are several juniors that have either maintained, not fallen nearly as much as the average in their space. Very few names have actually performed very nicely. You have discoveries, you have growing production, for example. Those are obviously less juniors. But as I say, I think that the junior space, the better names always have that window open to them.
Given the tough market conditions, do you expect to see more M&A in the silver space this year?
I do. I think silver is very particular. it's tough to find good, real, true silver deposits. You have a lot of companies out there that have silver in their name. I feel that they just masquerade as silver companies. They're really quoting their silver deposits on a silver equivalent basis. And when you look at the value of the silver in that deposit, it might be 20-25%. The rest might be lead or zinc. So they're so rare, and the highest quality ones, I think that they're going to be the first targets. It's true that some of the larger potential acquirers are suffering as well, and so their share prices are smaller or less than they ultimately otherwise could be. But at some point, it's just going to be too attractive to avoid and ignore. They'll find ways to make it happen. Either potentially it'll be mergers. Acquisitions will be perhaps a little bit tougher, but we'll see both of those start to happen for sure this year.
Given that silver has that higher beta, and when it rips, it really rips, does that create an extra layer of management resistance to doing a deal? Because, if we can just hold on,
that's right.
We're going to get there.
That's true. It becomes a bit of a chicken and egg kind of thing for them, though. As I was saying, their share prices are suffering. It makes using those shares as a currency to acquire these other companies a bit of a challenge. And there's no doubt some of that going on, as you say. But it's going to be interesting to see. I think they will have no choice at some point. And again, these deposits are rare. The higher quality ones in better jurisdictions are going to become irresistible.
And what are some of those high quality ones in better jurisdictions that you really like at the moment?
Yeah, so there are three that I would say come to mind as sort of top. There's Dolly Varden in the Golden Triangle. They've been growing tremendously. They acquired a deposit a year and a half ago. They're acquiring land nearby. A chunk of their shares are owned by Hecla. With this recent acquisition nearby, they're now completely surrounded by Hecla. So make of what you want of that, but it's certainly leading in a certain direction. But what they're drilling is very high grade, and that looks like it's going to get taken out. Again, that's going to be just too irresistible for someone. Another couple of names that I like are Suma Silver and BlackRock. So I mentioned BlackRock before. They just raised $5 million. They have 100 million ounces of very high grade silver. Again, a gem in the industry, a rarity. And I think that they can, over time, probably as much as double that. There's more drilling to do. There's a lot of infilling to do. There are gaps to fill. So they will do that. This is in Tonopah on the western side of the district.
Nevada.
Exactly. Thank you. And then you have Suma, who is actually their neighbor on the east side of the highway. And this was formerly owned by Howard Hughes. You have the Belmont mine. They have two projects actually at Suma. One in Tonopah, the Hughes project, and then they have another very attractive project in New Mexico, also very high grades. It's a large vein field. We're looking at 600-700 grams per ton grades. They're actually active there now drilling, and they've stepped out, going back to Nevada, they've stepped out as much as 4 or 5 kilometers, and they've made new discoveries, high grades. It just shows the incredible potential where what technology is bringing to the space, something that older mining methods or exploration methods would have never had the ability to find. And so there's always hope in terms of finding more silver. Technology is really proving to be a fantastic tool.
I think it's interesting, Peter, that none of your top 3 picks are in Mexico or Peru, which are the world's largest producing countries of silver. Is there any specific reason for that?
No, you're right, though. Mexico, I just want to mention Mexico, world's largest producer, was down 12% last year in terms of production, when overall demand has been, the last 3 years, is 10% above the 10-year prior average. Peru is down to 20-year lows. Their silver production has been falling for the last 7 years. They are more challenging geopolitically to deal with. Mexico is becoming, quote unquote, a little bit hostile in some ways to mining. Current administration does not want to approve open pit mines. I think that at some point reality is going to hit home. There will be no choice. There's just the demand is already. We've had 3 years of ongoing deficits. It's just going to be unavoidable. We're getting very close to that. Again, as I say, reality will hit home. They'll come to their senses. Of course, underground mines tend to disturb less, but open pit mines can be done very responsibly, and Canadian mining companies have overall a good reputation for that. So I think that will come back. And Peru geopolitically is also somewhat more challenging, but there's hope. I mean, I think if you look at one example, Bolivia, for example, they have been difficult with mining, and yet it's so important for their economy. And so I believe Bolivia is one place that is starting to open up more. They're becoming friendlier to mining. And I think that they've tried what Chile and Peru have been trying for the last couple of years. They've seen that it hasn't worked, and they've come around. I think that these other jurisdictions will do so as well over the next few years.
Okay, Peter. Wrapping things up, what are some of the key things you're looking out for this year, looking forward to or expect to see in the silver space?
So I expect to see the three categories I mentioned earlier: silverware, jewelry, and physical investment come back. They came off last year, notably, but still beyond the 10-year prior average. So we're still at elevated levels. I'm certainly looking very closely, like anybody in the commodity space, at what central banks will do and when they start to cut. I think silver could surprise and perhaps not lag like we've experienced and come to expect it to do, the way it lags gold usually. In the middle of a recession, I wouldn't be too surprised if it underperforms a little bit. It tends to do that, being more of an industrial metal. But there's research that shows that it outperforms gold prior to recessions. It underperforms in the sort of that middle part, and then it outperforms again coming out of recession. And that has a lot to do with fiscal stimulus. And as we see central banks start to cut, that should, the market will look forward, and silver will start to likely take off at that point. So that's something I would look at very closely. And industrial demand. Solar, I think, is being missed as a huge factor in silver demand. Last year, the Silver Institute earlier in the year had forecast that industrial demand would grow 4%. It actually grew by twice that much. It grew 8% when they revised their numbers. They initially expected that solar would represent 160 million ounces of silver demand. It ended up requiring 190 million ounces. And for the record, I had been saying from about the middle of last year, well before November, that we'd be in the 180 to 190 million ounce range of silver ounces going to solar, and it turns out to be at 190. So solar is really the 800-pound gorilla. We can't ignore it. Technology is advancing quickly, and even if solar demand were flat, we're moving to new solar technologies that are requiring, in some cases, 50% more silver per panel. So even if the overall production of panels were flat, we're going to need a whole lot more silver just for solar. It's going to have to come from somewhere. We've had 3 years of deficits. That there's going to be a reckoning, and the silver price will absolutely react. It's going to react when it's ready, but people need to be patient, and by being in the market and waiting for it, they will enjoy and benefit from that ultimate play.
So potentially a good year ahead for silver.
Exactly.
Well, Peter, thank you very much for joining us today.
As always, a pleasure, Paul. Thank you.
And this is Paul Harris for Kitco Mining at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. And if you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe.
Kitco Mining's special coverage of the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference is brought to you by Snowline Gold.